Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 30 Minutes of Torah Study for the Torah portion of Beshalach. So there's a well-known expression that if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person. Now, how nice would it be if we could be that person who gets stuff done? If we could be that busy person. The problem is, however, is that we have so many responsibilities, we have so many obligations in life, there are so many different roles and jobs that we do. It's not an issue of whether we're busy. It's an issue of the things that we do can sometimes be so emotionally draining. It's not that we don't necessarily have time to do more things, but it's exhausting intellectually, emotionally, mentally to go from one thing to the next, right? How nice would it be if we would be able to change the way we think, change the way we look at the world, to be so much more productive, to be so much more energetic, and to be able to actually do it with joy, so that we are the people who are accomplishing, we are the people that are doing, we are the busy people that are getting things done. So as always, we look to the weekly Torah portion for some advice. So the Jewish people are running for their lives away from Egypt. They're being pursued by the Egyptian army, and God performs for the Jewish people what is considered to be the signature miracle of the entire Bible, of the entire Torah, which is the splitting of the Red Sea. The Jewish people emerge on dry land. They are alive. They are happy. They are thankful. They're grateful. They sing to God a beautiful song in praise and in appreciation. But then it's time to move. It's time to travel on, and it's time for the Jewish people to march towards Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, but they don't budge. They don't move. Moshe has to force the Jewish people to leave the Red Sea. Why? Rashi comments, Moshe led the Jews away against their will, for the Egyptians had adorned their horses with ornaments of gold, silver, and precious stones, and the Israelites were finding them in the sea. The plunder at the sea was greater than the plunder in Egypt, therefore Moshe had to lead them against their will. So Rashi explains very simply that on the shores of the Red Sea were washing up all of the treasures from the Egyptian army that drowned in the sea. There was opportunities for incredible wealth. The Jews were taking advantage of the opportunity, collecting. They didn't want to go forward. They didn't want to leave. Very understandable because of the great opportunity for wealth that was there. However, if you follow the story of the entire Exodus process, it's a little bit hard to understand. Because God says to the Jewish people, God gave the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they lent them, and they emptied them out. Just earlier in the story, we're told that God commanded the Jewish people, go to your neighbors, go throughout Egypt, borrow their gold, borrow their silver, and ultimately empty them out. When the Jewish people left Egypt, they literally took all of the wealth that was found in Egypt. They had enough. They didn't just have enough, they had plenty. They didn't just have plenty, they were already wealthy. So why are they still sitting at the Sea of Reeds trying to collect more when they have a mission to accomplish? They have to move on. They have to go to Mount Sinai. Why do they have to be forced to be moved? Another question is that the experience at the splitting of the Red Sea was not just a physical experience where the sea split and the Egyptians were drowned, but this was one of those profound spiritual experiences that any human being has ever had. The Medrash tells us that a young child, a maidservant, was able to experience was able to have a tangible experience of God more than the greatest prophets were able to have. So the experience of the splitting of the Red Sea was essentially mass prophecy, a most profound spiritual experience. For all intents and purposes, the Jewish people at the splitting of the Red Sea, they saw God. If that's the case, how could they be so distracted by material pleasures? How could they be so distracted by silver and gold when they were just raised up to the highest of spiritual levels. So the commentaries explain that why did the Jews not move on? Why didn't they move forward? Why did they have to be forced to do it? Because they thought that they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing the right thing, that they were fulfilling a direct instruction from God. Therefore, it was hard for them to leave. God commanded them to empty out the wealth of Egypt. There had to be a transfer of wealth from Egypt to the Jewish people. Yes, they emptied out Egypt when they borrowed their silver and gold items, but if more wealth from Egypt washed up on the shore, they felt they were still obligated, they were still commanded to take from that silver and take from that gold. The Talmud says, God said to Moshe, I beg you and tell Israel, borrow vessels of silver and gold from the Egyptians in order to fulfill the promise I made to Abraham, so that he will not say God fulfilled his pronouncement and they will be enslaved and afflicted, but God did not fulfill. And afterward they will leave with great possessions. The issue that they faced could be framed in a halachic perspective. What happens when you're in the middle of doing a mitzvah and another mitzvah comes your way? Are you allowed to stop and interrupt the mitzvah that you're currently performing in order to do the second mitzvah? So the classic example that's presented in Jewish law is, if you are in the middle of studying Torah, which is a mitzvah, and then you hear about a funeral, and that funeral is passing by exactly where you're studying Torah, should you interrupt your study of Torah to go out to the funeral, or do you continue to study Torah? This is the same question that the Jews faced. There were two commands, there were two mitzvahs. There was the mitzvah to empty out the wealth from Egypt, and then there was the mitzvah to travel to Mount Sinai and to receive the Torah. The Jewish people were in the middle of fulfilling the mitzvah of emptying out the wealth of the Egyptians. Should they stop? Should they interrupt in order to go to Mount Sinai? So the rule from a halachic perspective is, if the second mitzvah that comes along your way, if someone else could perform that mitzvah doesn't demand or require you, then do not interrupt the study that you're doing right now. Someone else can do it. However, if you are the only one who can do it, then you have to leave. Applying that to the situation of the Jews taking the wealth from the Egyptian money, from their perspective, if they don't empty out Egypt from all its wealth, it's not going to get done. The silver, the gold is simply going to be standing there. So yes, there was another mitzvah to move to get the Torah Mount Sinai, but they felt that they were obligated. They were busy in this mitzvah of emptying Egypt out of gold. Therefore, they were not going to be able to go. The Jews felt, we're in the middle of doing a mitzvah. If we leave, no one else is going to be able to do it. Therefore, they cannot travel forward. Yes, Mitchell, you can unmute yourself. You got a question?
What is the value of gold in a desert? Well, just take all the gold from Egypt. What are they going to use it for? It makes no sense that there's such an urgency to get all the gold possible. It's just trinkets, no value in itself.
If the Jewish people were going to remain in the desert, you might have half of an argument. However, the goal of the Jewish people were not to remain in the desert. The plan was to go to Mount Sinai to get the Torah and go straight into the land of Israel, where the gold, the silver was going to be vital to fueling the new economy that they were going to need in the brand new country. So every dollar, so to speak, was critical to the development of the Jewish nation. And even if the Jewish people were going to stay in the desert, which at that point in time they thought they're going straight to Israel, they still needed to make a lot of purchases. They still needed to build a Mishkan. So there was plenty of uses right then and there. But of course, long term, every penny certainly was going to count and was important. So there's another element to this whole mitzvah of emptying Egypt of this wealth, and that is a Kabbalistic principle, which states that there are divine sparks that are embedded within the physical properties of the earth. When we utilize the physical and material for holy, positive things, we extract the godliness, the divine energy that's within that earth. So part of the mission of the Jewish people was not just to empty Egypt of their wealth, so they go from wealth to poverty, but rather it's to elevate the property of the Egyptians. It's to extract the divine sparks of the property of the Egyptians. So therefore, they were not just collecting physical wealth, they were collecting spiritual wealth as well. It was hard for them to leave. They felt that they would do something that was purposeful, that was meaningful, that was valuable. It was something that God had commanded. Yes, they're told to now do something else, but it's not so easy to just switch focus. It's not so easy to just do something else when you're in the middle of something very deeply. The problem, though, with all the answers that we've discussed so far in the class is that whether you're talking about it from a legal perspective, that the Jews were busy with the mitzvah, whether you look at it from a spiritual perspective, is that they were emptying Egypt of its spiritual wealth, the reality is that God himself commanded you to go to Mount Sinai. You're going to ignore that? You're going to have a hard time with that? If God himself commands you to go, you move. Why did the Jewish people have such a hard time? Especially since what was the command? The command was to go to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. The entire purpose of the Exodus from Egypt was to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. When Moshe argued with God at the burning bush, God said to Moshe, "Why am I sending you there? What is the purpose?" So you could redeem the Jewish people from Egypt so they could come and worship me on the mountain so they could get the Torah. The Torah is the purpose of the Exodus, and even more than that, the Torah is the purpose of the creation of the world. How could the Jewish people sit there, even if they thought that what they were doing was valuable, how could they not respond to God's command, a command that was so important, so central to their own personal lives, and so central to the entire creation of the world? How could they delay? How could they not move forward? The answer is that the Jewish people were so invested in fulfilling the mitzvah to empty Egypt out of its wealth that they found it hard and difficult to move on. What that means is they were committed. They were doing it for real. They gave their all. They were 100% dedicated and committed to do that mitzvah. When a person gives their all and fully invests themselves in something, it doesn't matter how important or valuable the next step is. It's not so easy to move on. It's not so easy to pivot. It's not so easy to turn, because you had all of your focus, all of your emotional energy was invested in this project and this task. And now all of a sudden you're going to do something else? Think about your own life. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been so invested in a project and all of a sudden your attention is called to something else and you simply just, it's hard to make that transition. It's hard to make that move because you're so focused. But this leads us to the question: were the Jews right or wrong? Were the Jews right to the degree that they were invested in the mitzvah of emptying out Egypt, to the extent that they felt it was hard to turn and to do something else? Or do we say that's wrong? What kind of attitude is that? God commands, you obey. At the drop of the hat, you have to move. So the answer is a classic Jewish answer, which is yes and no. There's some elements that are positive that we have to learn from. There's some elements that are a little bit negative that we have to stay away from. So first, what's the positive? What do we learn from this story? That when it comes to doing a mitzvah, what is our attitude? Our attitude is that we have to be all in. We have to be in that mitzvah 100%. Committed, dedicated, invested in the most full and real way, not just as if you're doing something that is of ultimate value, but precisely because you're doing something that is of the ultimate value. This afternoon, I was watching some surgeries on YouTube, right? As many of you know, If I was not a rabbi, I would have liked to have been a surgeon. I'm fascinated by surgery, and I watch a lot of surgery on YouTube. And I was watching two different surgeries. One of them was a stab victim in the emergency room. Where was the person stabbed? In the heart. Right? And I watched the surgeon in the emergency room open up the person's chest and do everything in his power to ultimately find the bleed, stop the bleeding, and so on. That surgeon was 100% invested in what he was doing. If someone had walked into that emergency room and said to the surgeon, "Did you hear that Tom Brady just retired?" it would not register. The surgeon would not turn around with one hand in the middle of the chest cavity of the person and say, "Really? Now? Why? What did he say? Show me the video." Impossible. Why? Because what the surgeon is doing at that moment is so valuable, it's so important, his attention is focused, glued, invested in what he's doing. That is how our attitude should be when we're doing a mitzvah. It's so valuable, it's so important, nothing could distract me, nothing is going to pull me away. My heart and soul are invested in it. Why? Because it is that valuable. What is a mitzvah? A mitzvah is a connection to the one who created the world. When you do a mitzvah, you're fulfilling the very purpose for which you exist. You're connecting to God in the most intimate way. The sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe writes, the word mitzvah means to connect. One who does a mitzvah connects with God, who commands that mitzvah. This then is what the Talmud means when it says, the reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. Namely, the fact that a Jew is able to connect with God himself, that itself is the reward. What this means on a practical level is that any mitzvah, whether it's Yom Kippur or a simple blessing on a piece of food, it's a cosmic, earth-shattering opportunity to connect with God. Every mitzvah, no matter how in our mind we might view it as being more important, less important, big or small, every single mitzvah represents the wisdom and the will of Hashem. Every mitzvah that we do, we are connecting to God in the most intimate, deep level. In other words, every mitzvah is a huge experience. Every mitzvah, right, requires, demands that focus. Nothing else matters. Just as on Yom Kippur, we are not going to be distracted from that fast, from going to shul. Nothing else matters. Everything is pushed aside because it's Yom Kippur. The same approach that we have to any mitzvah at all. The Rebbe writes, there's a powerful message we can learn for our daily religious life. When a Jew is invested in a certain element of religious life, he or she must be invested in that role 100%, with every fiber of their being, so much so that it's impossible to entertain the prospect of another. It's impossible to entertain the prospect of another task. So when a person is doing something, they should be fully emotionally invested in it. But what happens when it comes time to do something else? You need to take that same energy that you invested in the task that you're currently doing, switch that, transfer that, and apply it to the next thing that you're doing. Which means we have to be feeling conflicting emotions. On the one hand, I feel like I'm being pulled away. Why do I feel like I'm being pulled away? Because I was fully invested. On the other hand, we have to make sure that we also are able to be fully invested in the next task. But how do we do it? How is a person able to fully invest themselves in one thing and then switch to something else and also be fully invested in that thing? The answer is actually quite simple. This is incredibly doable if the focus and the motivation behind your actions is to fulfill the word of God. However, if the motivation and that behind your actions is about you, how you feel, what you like, what you desire, what you want, then yes, it's hard. Because it's hard for you to switch your focus from one thing to another thing. If there's one thing that you really love and there's another thing that you don't enjoy as much, it's going to affect you differently. It's going to impact you differently. And your ability to go from one job to the next job is going to be held back. But if your attitude is, whatever it is that Hashem wants, I'm there 100%, then no matter what it is, you're going to be there. I remember when I was a counselor in Lubavitch Day Camp in Toronto, probably the summer of 2001. We had a weekly class with Rabbi Dov Shochat, who is the head of based in the rabbinic court in Toronto, and the Chabad rabbi of the Toronto Chabad community. Unbelievable genius, brilliant Torah scholar, rabbinic judge, as wise, as smart as they come. And he started talking to us about what topics we like to study in Torah. And one boy said they like this type of learning, another one said something else. And Rabbi Shochat says, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. So what do you mean? Rabbi Shochat says, I don't even understand the terminology. I like to learn this topic more than another topic. He doesn't get it. He said, every single topic in Torah is equally representative of the wisdom and the will of God, and therefore is equally enjoyable, equally delicious, equally desirous, equally stimulating, equally entertaining. And that was incredible because I was not yet there in my life. And even today, I don't know if I've reached that level. But when your attitude is not what I like and what I want, but rather your attitude is what is required from me, then it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter when it is. It doesn't matter how much you have to pivot. It doesn't matter how much you have to transition, because your investment is to fulfill the will of God, to fulfill the purpose for which I was created, whether it's to the right, whether it's to the left, whether it's straight ahead, I'm all in. But if the focus of our life is what do I like, how do I feel, what kind of mood I'm in, then anytime you have to pivot, anytime you have to turn, it's so challenging, it's so hard, and it can be very frustrating. The Rebbe Rashab writes, wherever we are, we must be there entirely. Later you may be elsewhere, and you'll show up there 100%. But as long as you're here, you must be here. Of course, when you get to the next thing, you'll be entirely present. The main thing is that wherever you are, you should be there all the way, not looking to turn to the next thing. This attitude, this mindset, will help you when it comes to going from one task to the next. Because it's not about you, ultimately, it's about the job. So therefore, wherever you are, it has your absolute full attention. So you may remember that we began the class by asking this exact question, that it's very difficult sometimes to go from one task to another task because it can be incredibly emotionally draining. Not necessarily we don't have the time, but we don't have the headspace, the emotional space to do it. What do we learn from this whole story about the Jews and going from the splitting of the Red Sea to Mount Sinai? We learn that if the attitude is about me, about what I need and what I want, then yes, transitions are going to be difficult. But when the attitude is, what does God want? What am I needed for? Where is my purpose? If the way that we view life is, how can I serve God? How can I fulfill the purpose for which I was created? You know what we're going to see? We're going to see that in all of the circumstances of life, there is so much value. There is so much value that's there that we're going to be able to transition from one step to the next step with so much energy, with so much positivity, because we appreciate the gifts that God is giving us, the opportunities that He provides us to do things that are truly huge, that are truly meaningful, that are truly valuable. That will give us the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement to be able to do whatever it is that we have to do, because we appreciate how awesome, how good, and how much of a privilege each one of these things are. So, of course, when you get to the next thing, you'll be present all the way. And this is a very important point. Wherever you are, be there all the way. This is the hallmark of something that is true. Wherever you are, you don't ever want to run away. Rather, you do it deliberately and intentionally. This Saturday night, we have the annual Shul Winter Adult Social. This year, the theme of the Winter Adult Social is an art show. We have almost a dozen artists who are part of the Shul, who who are going to displaying their art and going to share it with us and discuss it, from paintings to photographers, from musicians to poets. It's going to be a beautiful evening this Saturday night, 7:15 to 9 p.m. at the shul. There's going to be wine and cheese, all kinds of interesting hors d'oeuvres, egg rolls, schmoozing, fun. It'll be a great time. I really hope you can join us. RSVP on the shul's website, shulcenter.org/adult social. And if you like, the after party could be at the Friendship Circle Cafe, right? So we can do it all. You can have everything in one night. And for the ladies, we have a Tu B'Shvat Seder on Monday, February 6th, 7 p.m. Please join us to celebrate the traditional Seder for Tu B'Shvat. Learn about the mysticism of the 7 kinds. Vegetarian dinner will be served, and wine. So that's a ladies' event, Monday night, 7 p.m. in honor of the New Year of the Trees. If you've never experienced the Tu B'Shvat Seder, you do not want to miss it. It is going to be led by Lee Bojan.